Welcome to Secure Insights, the podcast where we invite leading experts from the cybersecurity industry to share their knowledge and experiences. Today, we're thrilled to kick off our brand new season, which focuses on the cybersecurity sales industry with a very special guest, Gillian Loft from Microsoft. Gillian brings a wealth of experience in cybersecurity sales, having worked with some of the industry's biggest names, including Cisco, Palo Alto, and now Microsoft. She will share her journey, offering insights into how she's navigated her career in this sometimes challenging and often solitary field. Gillian will also give her top tips for success in the industry, highlighting the importance of partnering with different mentors along the way. In this episode, Gillian discusses the growing importance of data security posture management, DSPM, and how companies are securing their data layers and the evolution of the DSPM technology. So let's dive in and get started. Okay, good morning, Gillian. Gillian Loft from Microsoft. Thanks very much for joining us. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, Nick. Morning, great to be here.
Good stuff. So I have done a little bit of an intro. So why don't we get sort of stuck in straight away, if you don't mind, just to give our listeners on our podcast, Secure Insights, a little bit of background about sort of where you come from, your story, your journey, and how you've ended up to where you are today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. My journey, gosh, I started so many years ago, it feels like now. But in security, I joined a company called RSA Security. Many people will remember RSA Security. Mm-hmm. That was my very first into the security market. But before that, I was a recruiter. That was my very first selling job. And I know many people will say, gosh, recruitment's not sales. I would beg to differ. So I learned and honed my skills, essentially, figuring out which people went where. But I was fortunate enough to be operating at a time where I had a mentor, if you will, in a tech organization, and he was kind of waiting for me to knock on the door. So that was my into tech, and I went to work in distribution, where back in the day, Nick, people would say, you've got to do 2 years on a desk. So you've got to really hone your skills before we put you out in front of a bunch of customers. And that's what I did. So 2 years on a desk. And I was very fortunate. I've been headhunted most of my career, and I've built really solid networks. So I was headhunted out of distribution and started my international career. So I was headhunted by a company in Boston, Process Software. And they were bringing the World Wide Web to market. And I know it's like today it's not even a thing, but all those years ago it was a thing. So yours truly, found herself on multiple aircraft over many years, taking things like the World Wide Web to market. And from there, I was headhunted into RSA, where security was becoming really mainstream. And I think before then, Nick, it had been almost like a dark art, with lots of technical folks. But what I found, I was joining at a time where we needed to commoditize it. We needed to take it from it being this real dark art to actually it's mainstream, and boards are now starting to think it's important, it's a priority. I've got brand and reputational issues if, I'm breached. And so, that at that time, my security career took off. So I worked for RSA, then I worked for lots of smaller organizations as well, but always internationally. And then I found that the market was becoming highly acquisitive, and a lot of the smaller startups were being acquired by some of the much larger vendors. Yeah. That's how I ended up working at Cisco. So I was working in CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker Land, and we were acquired by Cisco. They were building out this massive security team and a massive platform. And I found myself spending 5.5 years there and really honing my skills in these bigger global organizations. And from there, I was headhunted into Palo Alto by a former boss of mine who wanted me to come in and start thinking about how we would understand the cloud and that whole software development lifecycle space. So the CNAP acronym was born, and there I found myself now, having conversations with really large organizations like Barclays Bank. Probably shouldn't mention too many names, but massive global organizations, and essentially figuring out, how do we secure organizations from the moment code leaves the developer keyboard right out into going into production in their cloud environments.
Mm.
And that leads me to where I am today, which is the wonderful Microsoft, where I found myself, again, involved in many of the large global organizations and their security postures and the risks that they face today.
Brilliant, great story. So I'm glad you said it. Actually, recruitment is a sales environment. It's a sales role, sales career. Definitely agree with that. But that set you up, but you mentioned you had like a mentor back then. Was that right? Yeah,
Yes,
and
yes.
pretty much everyone we speak to, all successful people have that. They start or when they connect and partner with a mentor for some guidance, it really helps sort of catapult their career. Was that a really important sort of decision for you to partner with a mentor?
If I'm being honest, it probably wasn't a decision that I made. It was a
Mm,
decision that was made for me. And I think I worked for a really incredible leader at the time, that understood the power of mentorship and what that could mean to the folks that were coming through. And I think it was his way of giving back, but it taught me some incredible lessons. And I think having had a mentor in my career, so early in my career, stood me in really good stead. And I've always operated in my career where I've always given back. So I understand that power and I
mm,
understand the value it brings to those individuals. So yeah, I was very fortunate, Nick. He showed me what it was to understand the power of networking, to understand the value in the relationships. And I don't just mean taking, I mean genuinely having that symbiosis in the relationship where, constantly we give, we show up in service to others because, essentially in selling, that's what we're doing. We're facilitating people to buy. But
hmm
from a career perspective, nurturing others and showing them the power of what it is, to show up in the right way, doors just unlock. And I think it's hugely powerful, hugely.
Yeah. And because we're focusing on, you're our first guest actually for the season, which is all around cybersecurity sales globally. So we're doing UK, we're doing the US, and we're touching on some EMEA country zones as well, that people are geographically based. And you've just explained how you broke into the industry. How have you seen the sales approaches and methodologies and sort of the environments change over the last 5, 10, 15 years through that journey? What's it like today, having sort of quotas and targets for large corporates, hitting a market area, to what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago?
It has changed hugely, Nick.
Mm,
And I think probably the biggest trend that you see, is this notion of technology being very cyclical. So what tends to happen, I think anybody listening to this from a selling perspective will understand this, and those who perhaps are in a different part of the businesses that we touch will see it. So technology becomes cyclical because obviously, there are certain trends and issues that start to arise. So at the moment, everybody's focused on data, and I know we'll
mm,
probably touch on that a little bit later. But
sure.
it's interesting to see how organizations produce such great talent, and those talented folks quite often will leave the bigger organization and say, look at this amazing idea. There's a real trend, there's a real issue here that nobody's really tackling from a very large corporate perspective. And so those guys, they leave, they set up a really small company. It could be Israel, it could be Israeli tech. We know it's a hotbed.
Yeah.
It could be in northern USA. It could be anywhere. Northern Europe is also a hotbed for great emerging technology.
Mm,
And so a problem arises. Somebody leaves an organization, they set up a really great tech company, and those smaller tech companies, they start driving into the market, and they take those messages into organizations, that educational selling process. And so what you see is, I think there are so many different types of sales folks that have emerged over the years because they're focused either on the educational aspect of security, and I think security selling is very much about education. It started as a really technical dark art, but now it's about taking those messages to organizations to say, we know you don't know you have this problem yet, but we can see it coming. And I think it's being able to understand, where those incredibly smart folks see those gaps, see where those capabilities are missing, and they create these amazing smaller organizations, but they're then consumed by much larger organizations. And then the journey starts again. So what we're seeing at the moment, Nick, is, you've got these amazing companies who are bridging the gap in where we're seeing the requirements around data and the data security posture management market. And so again, you've got these really incredible, bright folks who are setting up small data organizations to bridge that gap that the larger organizations aren't. And that's creating that tech space for incredible sellers to come in and then start educating buyers and different organizations on the challenges that they're going to face around their data. And that's cyclical. I think what's really interesting is that the fundamentals of selling, they're always there, the pillars that we work to. So if you think about the methodologies that have grown up over the years, you'll hear acronyms like SPIN, MEDIC. Yeah. And I think, for folks coming into selling, understanding, the bigger picture on how selling will become cyclical, but being grounded in a methodology, I think is really, really tremendous. So for those sellers who are coming in earlier in their career, understand SPIN, understand the complexity of consultative selling, understand something like MEDIC, those sorts of Bibles, if you will, that we use to underpin how we sell, that will set you up to have a great and a stellar sales career, to be, steeped and grounded in a methodology that enables you to execute and always be super performant. And that's what organizations are looking for, especially in the chaos of this, constantly evolving selling market where, we're educating, or, we're going out and talking to folks about the new tech, or, depending on wherever we are in that selling continuum, being grounded, I think, in a pillar like that will really serve you well.
And that segues us nicely actually into the subject of DSPM, data security posture management, which is a huge topic at the moment. We've helped a couple of companies grow their strategic sales teams out across the US and also into EMEA, and we'll touch on the sort of the skill set potential shortages in those two different zones. But what are you seeing out there with the sort of the emergence of DSPM coming through the sort of CS, the cloud security posture management world that's obviously been there for a while, but this new emergence, new take up of the data security posture management. Everyone's looking to protect their data and do it sort of as quickly as possible, and there's all these new players coming to the market. What do you see in the landscape?
I think the urgency is now being created, Nick, because of course, we're seeing the proliferation now of Gen AI. And I see it especially on my side because, we're actively involved in taking Gen AI, across the organization. Of course, that has, inherent risks. It also, creates great opportunity, but there are inherent risks. And so the conversations that we're having, around the security, the guardrails that organizations need to put in place are around the sources of data, and where are those data sources housed, how well protected are they, how well classified are they. So what we see, I think, is in the last 12 months, especially as Gen AI has taken this enormous foothold in everybody's consciousness, everybody's talking about it, but it creates this groundswell of, well, hang on a second, how can I implement this amazing technology around Gen AI when my organization may not be as well enough protected as I would like it to be, where my data sources are. And so, even in the last 12 months, we've seen the uptick in conversations around security around data, but also around, the classification of data. So organizations are looking at, how sensitive is my data? Is it sensitive? Where's my PII data? All of those good things. And so it's really created this massive, I think, uptick in the data conversation. But in fairness, Nick, I think what had happened over the last 5 years is, organizations have recognized that data was important. It's just become hyper important in the last 12 to 18 months when organizations like Microsoft have really pushed the boundaries, in terms of the way that we can go to market now with all this Gen AI. And so I think that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this this massive push into Gen AI, creating this now groundswell around really looking hard, shining the light into dark corners about where's my data. And so I think in order for the two to live together, now you're seeing this massive uptick in the data conversation.
Yeah, I think it was IBM. They published 2023, a typical data breach cost an average $4.45 million. So it's, yeah, and I know there's different figures out there, but it's huge, isn't it? It's huge. Like I mentioned, we've had some experience with building out functions in the US and across the European country zones, and we saw a real difference in availability of skills from the US. It's there, it's out there, it's being sold. Over in EMEA, it wasn't really, it was starting to. So you've got your big players coming over, going, right, we're going to hit mainland Europe and the UK. But in terms of strategic enterprise sales professionals, that we didn't really see a huge amount of experience in that sort of DSPM space. Yep, definitely from CSPM, and they're in that cloud SaaS, background. Would your advice to sort of fellow sales professionals that are looking to maybe, if they're in an organization and are looking at maybe their products and what the next 2 or 3 years looks like, would you sit there and go, look, yeah, it's something you should put a foot forward to and try and get into that space as quickly as possible? Do you see it as a real boom market?
I do. She said, putting a stake in the ground.
Yeah.
I do, and I think sellers who naturally lead a very curious, sales life, and I think it's a really strong trait. If you look at really good professional sales folks, I think they lead a very curious life anyway. And we're constantly evolving. We're constantly looking at the trends. We're constantly, we network all the time, as we said earlier. So in networking, leading that very curious life, you inevitably find yourself in and around conversations around topics like the data. So for me, the data conversation has been around for kind of, 2, 3, 4 years. I've seen professionals that I worked with in Palo Alto who've gone on to work in smaller startups, Israeli tech startups. And that intrigues me. It's why are you going there? What are you doing? So I think, first of all, yes, be very curious around the data subject. I think there will be lots of opportunity and there'll be lots of avenues opening up around different aspects of the conversation. So at the moment, we're seeing, I hate to use the word traditional because it's still a new market, but there are, kind of the traditional conversations that we at Microsoft are having around, data labeling, data classification. I think as the market matures, there will be more opportunities for folks to skill up, and I think it's the sort of work that you can do, even if you're selling in a different part of the market. If you're in CSPM or you're in CNAP, or those. So I hate to use those acronyms, but if you're in a different space, you will encounter issues and challenges around data. And I think just understanding that data conversation will help to broaden your skill set when you're having conversations with those organizations anyway, because they'll recognize that you're on top of your game. You know where the market's headed. You'll know the challenges. So I would say definitely it's an emerging market. It's a hot market. Certainly the conversations that I know that colleagues are having in Europe, in and around Europe. So mainland Europe, up in the Nordics, those conversations are being really driven quite strong now. So it's here, it's arrived, and I think find yourself a bandwagon and get on it.
So in terms, I know you've got some experience in this. We've spoken before about that. But what would your take be then on somebody who's they're working for a popular brand, they've got a successful sales career, but then they don't have a foot in this camp. What would they need to do? Because we spoke to quite a few people over in the UK about that, and they want to get into it. How can they put a foot forward to make sure they're stepping in the right direction to put themselves in that window? What do they need to do to get in front of VP of sales and CROs and make them believe that they can take that next step into that DSPM world?
I think it's skilling up. So for me, you and I, when we talk about this, I think my inherent curiosity means that I want to go away and research it. So I would say to folks who are perhaps to the side and they're adjacent of the conversation, skill up, Go and
Yeah.
see what other organizations in the space are doing, even if it's, it's a just a quick Google search to see what's Gartner saying about DSPM. Understand, the value and the size of the market, so that if you find yourself talking with a recruiter such as you, Nick, who says, yeah, I can put you in front of a great VP, then do the research, understand, where's the market headed, what's the size of the market, who are the main players. Go and see if you can find some, great startups. Do the research. It's there's so much out there, so much information that's out there at our fingertips, and from there, see where the conversation is headed. Go, on LinkedIn, for example, you probably find that you'll have 2 or 3 of your own network who are in something to do with data. Have those conversations. Reach out to folks on LinkedIn who would maybe want to have a conversation with you to help nurture and grow you. So find somebody who may not necessarily be your number 1 contact, but a number 2 contact.
Yeah.
I think these days, our in sales, we're all willing to help each other. I know we find it competitive, but I genuinely think there'll be folks out there. If somebody wanted to come and have a conversation with me, I'm happy to do that. I get people who reach out to me on LinkedIn all the time. They could be very early in career, they're students, and they'll ask me my take. I'll give them my time. So I think reaching out and skilling up, going out to Google, even Copilot, ask go to Bing and ask Copilot what's DSPM, and you can find a wealth of information, I think, to help inform you and give you a really good perspective, so that if you are fortunate enough to be sitting in front of a VP of sales in a data organization, having a perspective, that person, that individual, will know that you're not steeped in that topic, but the fact that you've come forward with a perspective, a point of view, and you're willing to kind of put a stake in the ground about what you've learned, I think showing that you're curious enough to have gone out there and done that will stand you in really good stead.
Yeah, great advice. And I think as well, showing that you've done maybe projects or added value pieces of work where you're giving back to fellow colleagues or the next generation. And if you don't mind me bringing this up, but I think when you were at Paolo, you set up or built a mentoring program for the Prism Cloud Academy women. From the ground. So that's, again, that sort of thing, isn't it? I mean, are you able to shed a little bit of detail around that?
I can, and that's a great shout out, Nick. I think, yes, in the big corporate environments that we're in today, it's super easy, I think, to be able to give back and to continue giving back into the organizations. At Palo, there was a great program where we had an awful lot of folks earlier in career coming in, and so we set up a mentoring program for some of the ladies that were coming through. So my passion is to make sure that some of the ladies that are coming through have not only the technical skills and the operational skills to thrive in these bigger corporates, but also some of the softer skills as well. And so what we did was we set up a program where on a bi-weekly or a monthly basis, we had a regular rhythm of business on it. So there's a full cadence, and over time, we skilled those ladies in understanding, how to operate and thrive in a business where, essentially, I think I hear this phrase a lot, Nick. It's this sense of imposter syndrome, and I think I hate to say this, but I do hear it a lot from earlier in career folks, and especially women. I had a conversation recently with somebody else about this. So I think because it resonated so strongly with me, I felt the need to kind of, put in place a program which was not just about, go read this textbook and understand this pillar of work. Have a toolbox where you feel really resilient and you feel like you can thrive in this environment. So that was a great project. We had a great time doing it as well. Met some really interesting earlier in career folks who've gone on to do some really great things, promotions and bigger roles in the organization. But I think, to your point, it's great advice, Nick. I think, yeah, if you can ask your leadership, can you set up a project? Can you include? It's giving back into the organization as well. It's skilling not just yourself but other folks. So yeah, great shout out.
Brilliant, great stuff. I went off piece a little bit. Just touching back to slightly in that sort of DSPM space with companies, sprinting out of the blocks from new startups. You've got all the different zones that you mentioned earlier. Who do you think, not necessarily naming organisations, but who do you think is going to win that race to get sort of market share? Who do you think is going to dominate?
Gosh, that's a $64 million question.
It's a great one, isn't it?
There are some early leaders. Those early leaders are obviously they are larger organizations, I think, that have pivoted. They've seen the opportunity and they've taken that opportunity to pivot. And so they're positioned. If you think about, what Gartner's doing in the Magic Quadrant, you'll see them as top right. They're innovative and they're quick to market and they've got some great technology. But it's always interesting when you look at a sector, because some of the early runners don't always necessarily, stay the course, because the market may have a shift and a pivot. And so what you may find, Nick, is that, there's some really early stage. When I say really early stage, they're probably around 2 or 3 years old. They've had some great funding. They've got some really strong tech that's emerging, because there'll be some capabilities that mainstream hasn't identified yet as being an issue, but these organizations will. So I think it's really difficult to call out who'll stay the course. Some of these earlier techs will get consumed by bigger organizations, but there will always be one or two that will stay the course. So those that I think they'll be nimble, they'll be agile, they'll be able to spot, where the trends are going, and they'll be able to pivot there. So my money's still on, some of the emerging tech, some of the early stage, that are 2-3 years old. They're seeing the bright lights. They're seeing some of these creaks, that we're seeing in the bigger corporates, and they will probably end up being right up there in the top right of the Gartner Magic Quadrant.
Interesting. See how it pans out. Maybe we can have another chat in a year's time.
Yes,
see what it all looks like. Indeed. Okay, cool. And everybody we have on, we always ask. We like to sort of finish up with asking what your sort of most valuable piece of advice would be to the next generation coming in. Obviously, you're in the sales space. What would be your biggest piece of advice to the next generation coming through, or people that want to transfer into the industry, and what would you do differently now, knowing what you do know now? Hindsight's a wonderful thing, obviously.
Yeah, with the beauty of 2020. I think going back to something that we touched on, so I suffered with imposter syndrome for a very long time in my early career. I never felt like I was good enough, and I think it's later in my career, having networked with so many people and have some tremendous relationships as a result of having my career. I think the folks that have taught me the most are the folks that have really lent in to say, you are good enough, and we're all putting the work in, I know. So I think for the folks who are earlier in career, I think I would put the work in to, understand what's really important to you, get a great, understand the values and the beliefs that you want to carry with you through your career, because that will, I think, help you really stand strong. So have a methodology, have a selling methodology that you really adhere to enable you to execute really well, so that you can stand the test of time and weather all the change that goes on around you. But also from a softer skills perspective, really hone those skills and understand what it is to be able to show up in service to others, to really have that kind of innate sense of, I believe in myself and others, and it's a community. We give as well as taking. And then I think, being able to package all of that up into a really well-rounded and grounded sense of what you want from your career will enable you to really identify the folks that you want to choose to work with, and who want to choose to have you in their environment as well. So I think it's not just about showing up and interviewing with somebody to say, I want to be in this job. It's understanding, what can you bring? what are my values, and how can I help to grow your business? And I think that comes from putting the work in probably much earlier than I ever did, so, to be able to kind of stand the test of time. So yeah, that would be the career advice I think I would give to my earlier self.
Brilliant. And also try to maybe partner with a mentor as well.
Absolutely. I
Mm,
think having and mentors can be folks from earlier, earlier in career. You may find that that mentor isn't right for you
mm,
mid-career, later in career. I'm very fortunate that I've identified folks in my network who I've been with for, and known for a very long time. But I've got new folks as well who come into my life and come into my career, and they've been very kind enough to share and help and guide and shape what I do now. I'm constantly learning and constantly evolving, and I think that's what helps you have a very long career in selling. It's figuring out how to evolve
yeah.
and
Okay.
being, working with folks who are kind enough to share their experiences with you.
Great advice. Great advice. Is there anything that you would, knowing what you know now, do differently?
I've had what I think of as the most amazing career. I have been fortunate enough to meet some incredible people. I started my career when many people may not know Mark Andreessen, but he was one of the earlier founders of the internet, Tim Berners-Lee. Having a cup of coffee with Tim Berners-Lee, having my Dilbert book signed. I've had a stellar career. I've met some incredible people. So for the folks that I've known who've shared their journeys with me, who've helped shape me, no, I wouldn't do anything differently, Nick.
That's great. That's good. You've had a fantastic journey and experience and work with small organizations. You've made that switch from recruitment into cyber sales, and then you went into the cloud space, and you've got some great brands on there from Cisco, Palo Alto, currently at Microsoft. Yeah, why would you? Fantastic.
Yeah. And now I've met you.
There you go. Brilliant. Oh, good. Gillian Loft from Microsoft, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. I really loved having you on. And yeah, let's hook up in around about a year to see what this space looks like and how different it is. And yeah, thank you very much,
Love
Gillian.
to. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.